Hi there, this is John Wilkinson again from History Made Easier. Now I've looked at how Chiang had seen the Communists as a threat, and he was right to do so. The Trojan horse policy was working for them. So that threat is going to be the focus of this presentation. Communists had worked tirelessly to organise workers and peasants, and a revolutionary movement gained rapid momentum. The May 30th incident led to radical protests against the working and living conditions town workers faced. And it was not only the factories and enterprises owned by foreigners that were threatened, but property in general. And there was a militant peasant movement in the countryside too, where landlords and the rural elites in general were the targets. Peasant associations, composed mostly of poorer peasants, but the result of the organisation of communists, were formed, posing a real threat to the rural gentry. By mid-1925, 500,000 peasants had joined the new associations in Guangdong, the main stronghold of the Goumindang CCP forces in the very south of China. And over the next 2 years this number quadrupled. What's more, the peasant association spread rapidly to other provinces. A social revolution seemed possible, a threat to the classes and social groups that formed the social basis of the Goumindang. Thus, this mass movement sparked by the May 30th incident led to a rapid, dramatic and ultimately deal-breaking increase in power and influence in both the Goumindang and the CCP. Not only was the political compromise on which the alliance was formed stretched to breaking point, the Communists emerging as a force for social revolution, as the Goumindang emerged as the force of property and order, but it enabled the Goumindang to consolidate its power base in Guangdong and expand its influence beyond, whilst at the same time membership of the CCP grew from less than 100 members at its conception in 1921 and barely 500 by 1924 to 20,000 members by the end of 1925 and some 58,000 by early 1927, with the Socialist Youth Corps attracting more and more militant students and young workers, all due to the radicalisation of the masses in the wake of the May 30th incident. And it was in this developing context that the Army of the United Front, with Chiang as its commander-in-chief, set out on what came to be known as the Northern Expedition, that lasted from 1926 through to 1928. Its aim was to break the stranglehold on power of the warlords and unite China under Goumindang control. To achieve this, Chiang was only too aware that he needed the help of the Communists and their supporters, notably in rallying the support of the peasantry in the provinces which the expedition's forces would pass, just as he also needed the support of the Soviet Union to arm his troops. Nevertheless, for Chiang there was always an equally important second aim, once the first had been achieved: to smash the Communists. And the Northern Expedition was a great success. The United Front had effectively broken the power of the warlords in the central and eastern provinces, so that the Goumindang could declare itself the legitimate government of China, and it made Nanjing the new capital. The army had fought with commitment, but as it moved northward during the second half of 1926, the workers and peasant organisations grew ever larger and ever more radical, more revolutionary, both in methods and aims. Much of this was spontaneous and even took the Communists by surprise. the leaders of the CCP were placed in an impossibly embarrassing position. Instructed to dampen the flames of revolution rather than lead it. But revolutionary forces had acquired a momentum of their own. The truth of the matter was that the party was confused and unsure about what to do, virtually powerless to influence events. Meanwhile, the Goumindang's right wing were at least in control of their own party. As Mao himself put it, the right has troops, the left has none, and the forces of counter-revolution were preparing to strike. Mao was aware of the danger, but could see a way out. He had become increasingly convinced of the significance of the peasantry, declaring in January 1926 that China's national revolution is, to put it plainly, a peasant revolution. Then, in early 1927, with the Northern Expedition in full swing, came Mao's report on the peasant movement in Hunan. By any definition, it was a major work, written only after many, many meetings in villages and county towns with leaders in the peasants' movement, not all of them party comrades, and supported with meticulously documented evidence. It led him to switch from the reluctant role of subverting the socialist revolution in favour of the bourgeois Goumindang national revolution to calling for the CCP to change its policy, or it would become irrelevant. In a very short time, several 100 million peasants will rise like a fierce wind or tempest. They will, in the end, send all the imperialist warlords, corrupt officials, local bullies and bad gentry to their graves. Mao was always one for the glossy phrases. Mao pointed to the way in which the peasant associations were already attacking the local bullies, the bad gentry and the lawless landlords, destroying the privileges they had enjoyed for thousands of years, reducing rents and interest rates on debt, ending hoarding that inflated grain prices, destroying their militias and replacing them with militias of their own, ending the influence of the clan and religious authorities too, so that their associations were now the sole organs of authority. Communists, he argued, had to decide whether they were with them or not. As it so happened, at much the same time as Mao's report was being digested by his CCP colleagues, a change of heart on the part of Stalin and the Comintern with regard to the peasantry was made known, admitting that they had made a profound mistake. Though the United Front was to be maintained, Moscow felt that the agrarian revolution should not be ignored. And what's more, the Russians had also come to the conclusion that a working relationship with Chiang Kai-shek was proving impossible, and an alternative leader from the left of the party should be found. So you can see things are coming to a head. The United Front was not going to last much longer. Peasants and workers were rallying behind the communists, as Chiang was pushing the Goumindang ever more to the right. Now don't forget that if you're interested in tutorials, you can see if I have a slot free. Just get your parents to get in touch with me at historymadeeasier@gmail.com, and we'll see if we can work something out. But for now, let me thank you, as I hope I always do, for listening, and wish you the very best of luck in your studies. Cheers.